www.tailwindtraders.xyz. Now, what is going to happen here with the CNAME record is a redirection. So basically, the traffic which comes inside to www.tailwindtraders.xyz is going to be redirected to another DNS entry. In that case, for example, tailwindtraders.azurewebsites.net. So if we recap a little bit what is in a URL, this is a unique resource locator, and the idea here is that really every resource on the web has a unique address. All right, this is a uniform resource locator, and for example, this is an example here. And if we examine what we have here, we start with the protocol. The protocol in that case is HTTPS, so it tells you that it's a web address. It's a secure web address, but it could also be something else. Okay, a URL is not just for the web. For example, it could be mail to. It could be, back then in my days, we had NNTP, the news transfer protocol. Or maybe you have protocol, like custom protocols for Teams calls, for example, for Microsoft, etc., etc. And then after that, you have the .com, which is a top-level domain. We talked about that. We have the Apex, all right? And then we have the CNAME, which is in that case www, but it could be literally anything you want. And then after that, in order to uniquely identify a resource on the web server, then you have a path, and the path can be something.html, it can be, in that case, page name, $1 equals 2, etc. So it's always different, and for each URL, you are going to expect a different response. And here, in that case, we also have a query string. Now, in certain URLs, you will also see additional parts, for example, a hashtag, which is going to lead to a target on the page, etc. But really what we have here is what defines a unique resource locator from a server-side perspective, if you want. And this is where the domain name services are going to act on those parts, the CNAME, the Apex, and the TLD. So of course, in order to set up a DNS, you need to verify that you own the domain. And why is it important? Well, because you want to prove that you actually own this address, because otherwise I could go and I could say, hey, I own Microsoft.com, please send me all the address, all the traffic that is going to Microsoft.com. And of course, you don't want that. So there are a few ways that you can do that, but really it's important to know that you cannot use a domain unless you verify it. And there are different verification methods. Here on Azure, we will see a validation using a TXT record, a text record. We'll talk about that in a moment. But there are also other validation methods, which depends a little bit on the provider that you are using. So without further ado, we are going to dive into a demo. And here we are going to set a custom domain on an Azure App Service. So let's go into the dashboard. Here, as you can see, we have different components that we'll use for the demos in this session. For example, here we have an app service which is titled www.tailwindtraders.com, and we will use our custom domain www.tailwindtraders.xyz to point to this web application. We will also do the same with subdomains for functions and also for a storage account where the process is a little bit different, as you can see later. Then we have also two app services running in Central US and in Europe, and we will do some load balancing between those two. And all this is possible thanks to DNS. So this is where we are going to set up the DNS in this particular demo. So let's go into the DNS portal. And here we see that this DNS is set up for tailwindtraders.xyz. So first we are going to see that we already told our registrar, this is where we bought the domain name, that it has to point back to Azure to those four different values. We see that we have ns1, 2, 3, and 4 -05.azure-dns.com. So basically this is a redirection that the registrar is going to do for us and point all the traffic back to Azure. And in fact, if we go into a terminal and we do a host command, we see that for the public is already informed that this particular domain is pointing back to Azure. However, we haven't defined anything yet. And so if we go into a portal, into a website, and we try to open www.tailwindtraders.xyz, then this is going to fail because, of course, Microsoft Azure has not been informed about the redirection yet, and this is why we need to do some DNS settings yet. So let's go back into the DNS. And what we are going to do now is go first into our app service And in the overview here, in